And the AI hype cycle, spurred by the success of OpenAI's ChatGPT, has sparked conversations about the use of the technology across businesses and day-to-day life. Our next guest published a piece on a controversial way that AI algorithms can be used in the workplace, union busting. Joining us now, we've got Yanis Varoufakis, who is the former Greek Minister of Finance, University of Athens Economics professor, and the MeRA25 Leader. Thank you so much for joining us here this morning. First and foremost, just walk us through this technology and what you've come to discover about it.
Well, we know that companies like Amazon have been investing for years now in software with which to troll the communications between workers in order to have an early warning of any unionization drive. The latest utilization of artificial intelligence in the realm of designing exotic, fantastic, brilliant antibiotics by means of, AI raw power, exactly the same algorithms used in order to explore the chemical spaces and to find correlations between particular agents and proteins that can destroy bacteria that are a real and present threat for humanity. Exactly the same process can be used by companies like Amazon in order to discover which warehouses are more prone to the Chris Smalls effect, to successful attempts at unionizing. And my personal concern is that in a world in which capital has so much power over labor, with the result being macroeconomic instability, because inequality in the income and wealth distribution is causing an enormous amount of macroeconomic instability. In that world, this particular use of artificial intelligence is detrimental not only to the interests of American workers, workers in the United Kingdom, in Europe, but also to the very fragile stability of what we have as a macroeconomy.
Yasu Yani, by the way, it's Julie here. My friend Alex, our friend Alex, teaching me a little Greek to get ready for the segment here today. So what you're describing is effectively worker surveillance, but an almost souped up worker surveillance because of AI. Now, the European Union has made some initial steps to try to regulate AI in a broad sense. It sounds like you would be in favor of doing something more specific on this front. In other words, what does one do to address what you're talking about?
The European Union is struggling to find some method of regulating artificial intelligence. I believe that it's a bit like King Canute trying to push the waves back or the tide back. It is that pathetic an attempt. The intention is very good, but the effect is going to be minuscule, not worthwhile discussing. My concern, I don't have any solution, but what I'm saying is this. We need to understand, I'm a tech enthusiast. I love AI, I love technology, but we have to understand that AI is particularly stupid. It does not understand the difference between a bacterium that can kill people and a unionization drive in some factory or warehouse of a conglomerate. And it can be used with the same effectiveness to kill bacteria or to bust a unionization drive. Now, are we happy with that as a society? This is what we need to decide collectively in a democratic context. I don't think we should be happy, or we have the right to be happy.
What do regulators need to get right about AI right now, from your perspective?
Oh, a whole host of things. You don't need me to tell you that exactly the same way that we need a protocol, a treaty internationally to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. We've needed that for decades, and we've been working towards that for decades. We need something very similar to stop AI-driven drones and other weapons from creating circumstances of mass destruction, new weapons of mass destruction. We need to make sure that AI is used in order to enhance human intelligence rather than to dumb us down, rather than to replace, for instance, journalists like your good self. with artificial idiocy, which simply regurgitates whatever it is in the system already. So we have our work cut out for us to make sure that, like every instrument, AI is used for the purposes that enhance the human condition rather than downgrade it.
I want to switch gears for a moment, if I could, because there is another tool, I guess, that you could argue that's new in the past few years, and that is cryptocurrencies. And you have written about this most recently from a sort of central bank coin perspective, but we are also paying a lot of attention to it from a regulatory perspective here in the United States. Mm-hmm. And I guess I would just ask, how should central banks around the globe be using crypto themselves, whether it's a coin or other tools, in order to enact policy?
Well, let me make a very stark distinction between, on the one hand, cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and so on, and what I think is the future, or should be the future, which is a central bank digital currency, a digital dollar issued by the Fed in your case, by the European Central Bank in our case. The reason why I'm a great supporter of CBDCs is that there are a number of merits, like, for instance, fighting tax evasion, allowing the central bank in periods that are deflationary, like we used to have in the last 15 years or so, directly to inject a stimulus into the economy rather than doing it through the Wall Street banks or the City of London banks, which we know is simply creating asset price inflation without doing much to stimulate a real, physical, fixed capital formation. But take the example of the First Republic bank in your country. The solution of selling it to JP Morgan was hailed as a private sector initiative, a private sector solution, when we know that this is a bit of a fib, isn't it? The FDIC took a major hit of $13 billion approximately, extended the line of credit of $50 billion to JP Morgan for that. And in the process, it made a too big to fail bank, JP Morgan, even larger. Now, that is clearly not in the public interest. But if you did have a digital dollar, effectively the ledger of the Fed would be able to take on all the depositors of First Republic or the Silicon Valley Bank or whichever bank is failing. The money would simply be transferred onto the public ledger, digital wallets of the Fed. The Fed could sterilize this liquidity so as not to increase the money supply simply by selling an equivalent sum of the massive stock of assets that it already has after 13 years of quantitative easing. And there would be no question about guaranteeing those deposits. Those deposits would be as safe as the United States of America is, since they will be sitting on the ledger of the Fed, and there will be no cost to the taxpayer. And you wouldn't have a too big to fail bank getting even bigger on the basis of a state subsidy, which is what happened with First Republic.
Yanis, central banks, obviously, one of their designs is to be stable, is to be conservative. What you're describing would be a more sort of radical, certainly in central bank terms, move. Do you think central banks in general, and in particular the Federal Reserve, need to be more progressive, more forward-thinking, more, technological, if you will, when it comes to this and other things for that matter?
Well, absolutely. Because let's face it, if the Fed doesn't do it, the Central Bank of China is already doing it. There are already 135 million digital wallets that the People's Bank of China has already made available, including to Europeans, including to Americans. Anybody can have them. And if the Fed simply, sort of circles the wagons behind all technology, and refuses to be forward-looking, I think that the United States will be falling behind in that regard. Allow me to say that in the end, what I just proposed, for instance, an alternative way of saving First Republic, is actually, my proposal is more conservative than what happened. Because think of it, small c conservative. What I'm suggesting wouldn't have cost the taxpayer anything, whereas what they actually did, using old technology, a standard bailout, which was embedded in the so-called JP Morgan private sector solution, in the end was a bailout with taxpayers' money of a failed bank.
Right. Well, and then I guess the question is, would they ever even consider something like this? But I guess we'll see. To your point, China's doing it already. We have to leave it there, Yanis. But thank you so much for joining us. We'll talk again soon, hopefully. Yanis Varoufakis is former Greek Minister of Finance and University of Athens Economics professor. Appreciate your time.